There were states in the world that arose from the will of charismatic leaders who became sovereigns. Others were formed from a mutual guarantee, which arose during a confrontation with a powerful enemy. And Ukrainian statehood arose thanks to one ferryman. According to legend, the brothers from the tribe of the Polans, Kyiv, Shchek, Khoryv, and their sister Lybid lived on the banks of the Dnipro, and the oldest of them, Kyiv, was a carrier across the stormy river, and his craft made Kyiv so powerful and influential that he and his brothers managed to form a separate settlement, which later grew and became Kyiv, the capital of one of the most powerful early medieval states, Kyivan Rus. Living along such powerful rivers as the Dnipro, Dniester, Bug, and Don, our ancestors were simply forced to be good sailors. In addition, these rivers, including the Dnipro, were lively trade routes. This feature was noticed the first time by the ancient Greeks who settled along the banks of the Prepontida on the coast of the Black Sea. Their merchants on ships began to rise from the mouth of the Dnipro, the Dniester, and the Don up to the lands of steppe barbarians. In particular, Greek merchants had a lively trade with the Scythians. When Kyiv became the center of a powerful state, Kyivan and Scandinavian merchants began to build a waterway already downstream, to Byzantium, to the Greeks.
Перша українська держава – Русь.
The first Ukrainian state of Rus emerges as a kind of river empire. After all, in those times, people got around via long rivers. There was simply no other way of getting around in the forests of Eurasia. In addition, forest tracts were controlled by forest tribes. And the first founders of the Ukraine of the Rus period were the Normans, and they moved via rivers.
Нормани, і вони пересувалися річками. За допомогою української флотилії
With the help of the Ukrainian flotilla, the Kyiv princes tried to spread their influence on the territory of neighboring Byzantium. In addition, the fleet was used in the attacks by Prince Sviatoslav on Khazaria. With his help, the princes subordinated neighboring states and tribes. Then there was no strict separation between a merchant, a warrior, and a sea robber. The same people often spoke in all three guises. Their behavior depended on the circumstances they found themselves in. Even the princes of Kyiv quite often acted with their squad as security detachments with merchant caravans. Such voyages were a lucrative business, and when the princes realized this, they quickly got hold of the main commodity flows, which were moved by rivers and then by sea to Constantinople. In this way, the prince also acted as the largest merchant. On the other hand, the princes and nobles did nothing in any way to equip the state fleet. The princes' shipyards were not built, as there was no naval specialization. Nevertheless, the successful location of Kyiv on the halfway point from the Varangians to the Greeks' trade route at least provided the city with the role of an important transit point and trade center. Using river and sea routes as well as technologies for dragging boats around the cataracts, Ukrainian merchants could transport their goods to distant countries and to participate in trade between the Scandinavian European states on the one hand and also with Byzantium and the countries of the East on the other hand. The weak spot of this trade route was the so-called drag. This is the place where it was impossible to move by water. That's why boats had to be dragged along the shore. A special track was built, stacked with round trunks of trees, and ships rolled on them, like on a conveyor belt. That's why the boats needed to be small and super light. Most of the merchants who decided on the drag did not even unload their goods from the ships. After all, the loading and unloading operation and the transfer of goods often ended in theft or even robbery by forest tribes from the surrounding area. Given this danger, the way from the Viking to the Greeks was laid not so much by the merchants as by the tribes of the Viking warriors. They were not afraid of attacks by forest tribes. Moreover, they themselves hunted foresters, captivated them, and then sold into slavery in Byzantium. When the from the Varangians to the Greeks route appeared, and part of it passed along the Dnipro, then the Normans actually came to the Dnipro because of the lure of profit, the desire to take and sell people into slavery. But a river empire is impossible without access to the sea, and the way to the sea was just given by the Dnipro River. But you still had to get to the Dnipro. The first drag was between the Lybid River and the western Dvina River, and from there overland once again to the upper reaches of the Dnipro. Another drag already in the lower reaches of the Dnipro is the so-called rapids. They were once located between the current cities of Dnipro and Zaporizhia, and now they are at the bottom of the Dnipro reservoir. However, during the times of Kyivan Rus and in the Cossack period, the rapids, these were rocks and stones in the middle of the riverbed, led to an almost guaranteed shipwreck, so the rapids were bypassed overland. And it was not easy, because the length of the piece of river with rapids exceeded 80 kilometers. There were 12 rapids, so it was necessary to drop boats 12 times on the water and lift them to the shore. If we're talking about Kyiv, about the campaigns of the princes, then they had to pass their warships through the rapids, the so-called Dnipro rapids. And it was very problematic to get a large ship across the Dnipro rapids.
Надзвичайно проблематично.
River types also determine the types of vessels. Boats should have flat bottoms to pass through shallow water and light enough to be pulled by dragging. At that time, our ancestors did not have seaports, so they went to sea on river boats. These boats were small and very poorly adapted for navigation on sea waves. So going into the sea, the merchant caravans kept in sight near the coast, and so in fact the merchants sailed to Constantinople by following the contour of the coastline. The boats of Kyiv merchants were actually quite strong and seaworthy, sufficiently safe for river boats, and they were completely different from the ships of their competitors, Scandinavian Vikings. Their ships had a wooden frame lined with planks, and the vessels of Slav merchants were hollowed out from the solid trunk of a tree.
Розвивався, наприклад, річковий флот.
For example, the river fleet developed. These were so-called monoxels, or dugout canoes. What is a monoxel? These are boats made from a single tree trunk. Our ancestors have since the Stone Age been going to their neighbors on such boats to conquer their territory. They're mentioned in the work by Byzantine Emperor Constantine Porphyrogenitus called On the Management of the Empire. The emperor writes that the Slavs from our lands did not just go on such boats along the Dnipro, but also went out to sea. Moreover, they decided to maneuver on their monoxels against the Byzantine fleet and land on the coast of the empire of Constantine Porphyrogenitus. The Byzantine emperor noted such a feature. The Slavs living in the forest cut the thickest trees, made boats out of them, and handed them over to the Rus, and the latter attached oars to them, and they float on those boats in the sea. There is such an intertribal specialization. The first ones are shipbuilders, the others are seafarers. By the way, single-deck boats were hollowed out on the territory of Ukraine right up to the 19th century. Some of these monoxels serve fishermen to this day.
Така цікава, неперервна традиція судобудівництва.
There was such an interesting tradition of shipbuilding on the territory of our state. The first thing was local shipbuilding, beginning with monoxels, with their improvement under the impressions received from guest ships. And the second is when subsequent waves of guests arrived on their boats. Then the local people saw and perceived the specifics of these boats.
Бачили специфіку побудови цих човнів.
First of all, our ancestors began to look closely at the Scandinavian fighting dracars. These ships, although they were not large either, at least in the 9th century, but they showed themselves perfectly in the sea. The dracar's design was a breathable one, as the boat's lining was not fastened tightly, so it folded quite elastically under the beat of the waves. The seafarers of Kyivan Rus also began to apply these features. They began to build up the sides on their monoxels. Over time, the new type of ships was practically equal to the sea dragons of the Vikings, the dracars. Of course, the boats were used not only to transport goods, but also for war. More precisely, to transport troops and supplies to the theater of war. Our princes did not dare to conduct battles on boats against the Byzantine fleet, equipped with Greek fire.
Вікінгам їх вже потрібно було значно більше.
Vikings needed much larger ships for sea travels, but here on the Dnipro, we needed less, but in large numbers. And in the campaigns, as we see, the Rus won by a large number. If you take the campaigns led by Prince Ihor, then the numbers are mentioned. More precisely, when Prince Oleg, 200 warships. A figure of 800 was mentioned under Ihor, but this number is not a real one. The vessels were universal. They could carry either a certain amount of goods or a certain number of armed soldiers if that was necessary. That is why the Slavs often surprised the Byzantines with the appearance of large combat flotillas at the walls of Constantinople. These warships were the same merchant ships. There was no difference. For example, according to Byzantine chronicles, Kyiv Prince Sviatoslav invaded Bulgaria with an army of 60,000. Most of the troops arrived by water, on the river boats of that time. And the chronicler recorded a half-legendary story about how Prince Oleg of Kyiv resorted to a cunning tactic during the campaign against Byzantium. The capital of the empire, the city of Constantinople, was located on the shore of a convenient bay called Golden Horn because of the concave line of the shore. In peacetime, merchant caravans went there and traded directly from the ships, and during the war the Golden Horn Bay was blocked off by a thick chain so that enemy ships could not get to the walls of Constantinople. However, this did not work during the naval campaign led by Prince Oleg. There are recollections that the small size of the ships allowed them to be put onto wheels, and when the Rus came under the walls of Constantinople, this was during the reign of Prince Oleg, they managed to get around the chain of the Golden Horn. This chain made it impossible for any warships to pass. It is not known whether Oleg put his ships on wheels or on ice rings made of tree trunks as during the drag. However, Prince Oleg seized the city of Constantinople and nailed his shield on its gates. The chronicler announced this proudly. By the way, Prince Oleg was not only a master of military tactics, but also a strategist. Thanks to merchants who traded in Byzantium, he had reliable and timely information about the state of affairs in a hostile country. And Oleg planned his campaigns so as to attack a much more powerful empire at times of its greatest vulnerability. This happened when the emperor left Constantinople with the army and the fleet and went to another war. At this time, there was actually nobody to defend the empire's capital from invasion by the Slavs. Still, our ancestors did not dare to start an open battle with the strongest rival in Europe at that time. The essence of the maneuver was simple: to approach quickly, to win quickly, to take the trophies and return home before the Byzantine army and fleet arrived.
Менші ці кораблі, лодії, то тут вигравали ще й швидкохідні.
Smaller ships also won due to their speed. After all, the Byzantine fleet was also oared, and the Rus boats could go both on oars and under sail. But the smaller and lighter boats had a certain advantage in their speed and maneuverability. That is why after the attack, the Rus managed to leave Constantinople even before the arrival of the Byzantine fleet.
Швидко відходити із Константинополя до приходу візантійського флоту.
Найбільше руси докучали Візантії.
Most of all, Rus rattled Byzantium with sea campaigns in the 11th century, when the fleet of Constantinople was at the height of its power. A full time of peace came to Byzantium later, and the fleet was gradually reduced, so that it virtually disappeared. Venetians were actually responsible for the defense of the empire at sea from the 12th century, and in those days Kyivan Rus entered a period of civil strife, and then nomadic tribes in the lower reaches of the Dnipro completely blocked its way to the sea. But this is the subject of the next program. In the meantime, remember that each phenomenon has its good and bad sides. It's pro and contra.